Good morning and welcome to the 2020 virtual George Shirley competition for composers. I am Louise Toppin, the director of the George Shirley competition, and along with our founder, George Shirley, will serve as your hosts for this event. We are both professors of music and voice at the University of Michigan. My colleagues and I have performed, lectured, taught, and recorded the works of African American composers. This music is an important part of the American story, and we at the competition are proud to advocate for its preservation and inclusion in the standard musical canon. This competition is a space for education, performance, and conversation on all aspects of vocal music of the African diaspora. The Composers Competition you are viewing today is a part of the larger George Shirley vocal competition founded in 2010 to encourage high school, college, and now pre-professional singers of all ethnicities to learn and perform the works of African American composers.
For our 2017 competition, international soprano Marquita Lister added a composer's prize to the vocal competition to foster the creation of new music by African American composition students. And we have hosted this competition in a live online hybrid format since its inception. Although we were regrettably unable to host our live vocal competition this weekend, we are delighted to present to you an all virtual composers competition with 4 professional composers in conversation with our 5 young composers. I would like to start by introducing you to our 4 judges. Dr. Marc Lomax II is a highly sought-after lecturer who specializes in the socio-political and spiritual aspects of African American music, race, and the usage of the arts to build community. With his latest release, 400, an African epic, Lomax tells the story of the African diaspora over the course of a 12-album cycle. It explores thousands of years of the history of pre-colonial Africa and Afrofuturism, expressing a vision of what Blacks in America will head toward in the next 400 years. Lomax calls this project a vehicle that celebrates the resilience, brilliance, strength, genius, and creativity of a people who continue to endure, and offers a transformative view of the future. Welcome, Dr. Lomax. Hughes Brown Jr. has received numerous commissions ranging from National Public Radio and the Atlanta Symphony to universities, church, and civic organizations, and his compositions have been performed throughout the world, including at Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall. He was nominated for the Audelco Award in Black Theater as an outstanding music director and arranger of the off-Broadway musical play Zion. His works are published by Lawson Gould and Roger Dean Publishing Companies, and he is former president of the National Association of Negro Musicians and co-founder and chairman of the board of directors of Onyx Opera Atlanta, a nonprofit operatic ensemble founded for the purpose of performing works by African American composers, as well as Western European operatic literature. Welcome, Dr. Brown. Mrs. Regina Harris Bayocchi has composed works for orchestra, chamber ensemble, several instruments, and has written a libretto and 1-act opera on authors Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. Her writings on artists of color, women, spirituals, jazz, gospel, blues, hip hop, and poetry are published by Oxford University and the Center for Black Music Research Journal, among other noteworthy publications. Her music is featured on numerous recordings, and she received a National Endowment for the Arts Regional Artists Program grant and is a recipient of the Chicago Music Association Award. She is a member of the National Association of Negro Musicians. Welcome, Mrs. Baiocchi. Dr. Trevor Weston's principal composition teachers include African-American composer pioneers T.J. Anderson and Ollie Wilson. His music has been called a gently syncopated marriage of intellect and feeling. This from the Detroit Free Press. Weston's honors include the George Ladd Prix de Paris from the University of California, Berkeley, a Goddard Lieberson Fellowship from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and residencies at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts and the MacDowell Colony. The Boston's Children's Chorus commissioned Weston's Truth Tones for a national television broadcast honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Manhattan Choral Ensemble premiered Weston's Paths of Peace for choir and chamber orchestra using the text of Jupiter Hammond, who was enslaved on Long Island. Welcome, Dr. Weston.
I would like to briefly describe the format of our competition. Along with an application, each competitor submitted a score, MP3, MIDI recording, and a brief statement about the composition. The judges have reviewed this information. To begin the competition, each composer will introduce their song, and then you will hear a performance of the song. At this time, I would like to thank Lucia Helgren, Colleen Boucher, Lenora Green Turner, and Kiswana Kanyenda, who are either current or recently graduated master's and doctoral students from the University of Michigan, for learning the songs and submitting these recordings. Following each performance, the panel of judges will have 10 minutes to ask each contestant questions about the compositions. At the conclusion of the conversations, the judges will submit written comments and scores for tabulation. During the adjudication portion of the competition, we will show you a 10-minute film of the 3 winning composers of the 2017 competition, with performances of their songs by Kiswana Kanyenda and Dorian Dillard. These 3 composers that are featured are B.E. Boykin, Marcus Garrett, and our first prize winner that year, Brandon Spencer. Our contestants, who must range in age from 18 to 35 in order to compete, are this year current or recent graduates of University Masters of Music programs. In accordance with the competition rules, each contestant has submitted an art song, not a spiritual arrangement, written within the past 2 years. The texts are by lesser or well-known poets, or are written by the composer, him or herself. Therefore, without further ado, we will begin with our first contestant, Ethan Godfrey. Ethan Godfrey is a composer and a singer. He has a bachelor's degree from Morehouse College with an emphasis in composition. He is currently a master's student at the University of Arkansas studying vocal performance. Ethan, would you please introduce your song?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. The poem, Let America Be America Again, by Langston Hughes, details a time in history where minority groups had a hard time living in this homeland of the free. It gives account of a time where the world would tell us one thing and reality shows us another. It was a time where justice was not served on behalf of the oppressed, and yet the oppressors could potentially do anything they wanted. Unfortunately, most of the same challenges recorded in the history of that time has not gone away. I picked this text because of its relevancy to today's economic and political climate. My goal for this piece is to show how it feels to be a minority group in America, which is denoted in the piece as a descending F minor arpeggio, symbolizing how America has let her people down. Whether one is Black, white, Asian, disabled, gay, straight, Jewish, Muslim, or anything or anyone else, life in America has never been as bright as it may have ever seemed. And now, please enjoy Let America Be America Again.
Let America be America to me. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be a pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. Is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream that dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great strong land of love, where kings never connive, nor tyrants schemed, that any man be crushed by one above, that any man be crushed by one above. It never was America. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic grief. Opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. America never was America to me.
Wow, that was good.
Thank you. Now we will have some feedback from the judges. Dr. Lomax, would you please start us off?
Sure, thank you. Mr. Godfrey, I enjoyed this piece. I like the intro. It really, I think, served well to set the mood. Good use of text, although I really wanted to hear you repeat that first line, "Let America be America." To me, it just evoked something that I wanted to hear again at some point, if not right away. Like how you use your harmonic materials and transitions. A note on the score, let me find it. At measure 56, the spacing could be better and the pacing of that first phrase there. "Oh, let my land be a land where liberty." It just felt like it was rushed to me. And I felt like it was an important line in that part of the music, and I would like to have taken some time to really digest it. And the last thing, I appreciated the variation in the accompaniment to really paint the words. So I appreciated your work on this piece, and I enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you.
Dr. Brown?
Dr. Brown, you're on mute.
Dr. Brown? You there? You need to unmute, Dr.
You're muted.
Okay.
Oh, you just did it.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can, yes.
Yeah, I was saying that I really enjoyed the piece very much, and I particularly like the way you treated that introduction, which is almost Stephen Foster-like in the simplicity of the harmonies, and then that transition to the minor mode really immediately parallels this America that we perceive to be something wonderful and great, with the fact that there's a dark and low side. So it's very good treatment of the modal relationship there. And I don't know whether you were influenced by Margaret Barnes or not, but you sort of have the same kind of ebb and sway in the rhythm of this piece as in her I Too Sing America. Langston Hughes is always a good poet to select because of the fact that not only is there an interesting kind of rhythmic element in his poetic writing, but because his social commentary is timeless. And so there was a very good choice on your part. I like the range of the piece. It's accessible. I think what you can do is allow a bit more time for some of your phrases to breathe and give the listener a chance to actually absorb the full meaning of the text. And then the one final comment is, yes, I would like to have heard a little bit of a greater extension of your return to that major key mode before you sink back into this darker minor area. But overall, the piece was very well conceived and a good performance representation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Baaki?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I think the first two speakers have sort of summed up what I wanted to say. I did want to compliment the singer. I think she did a wonderful job. Let America Be America is strong enough that it should be repeated. I had pretty much the same comments at measures 56, 57, 58, and also again at measure 60 going into 61. I'd like to see those phrases breathe a little bit more. But I think it's, and if Mr. Godfrey doesn't already know it, I think Langston Hughes would really look fondly upon this piece because he loved music and he loved reading to music. Most of the readings that he did were poetry to jazz, but he also had an affinity for having his music set. And so that's a wonderful thing. I would caution Mr. Godfrey, having worked with the Hughes estate, if you're going to publish these songs, make sure you look into permissions. That can be a sticky thing. You don't want to go too deeply into setting a lot of music if you're looking for publication, because these things can be brought to a screeching halt by attorneys who may not have Langston Hughes's passion for the music. So I really enjoyed the piece very, very much, and I commend you on your setting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Weston?
Good morning, Mr. Godfrey. Really enjoyed this setting. and I agree with just about everything that my fellow judges said. I do have a question about the opening because it is a really nice piano opening and it's, I think, a little long. I'm wondering if you've thought about making it a little smaller only because I almost expect maybe something similar later in your piece, meaning imagine that this opening gesture is like a character in this kind of story you're telling us, and it doesn't really come back that kind of space. So that's something you might want to think about. But what I do like is that descending triplet idea that is part of your ending. I think the last few measures of this piece were just fantastic for that reason. Something else that I really wanted to mention, and maybe this is connected to my earlier comment about expansion. I really like the homophonic section in measure 46, and I think this is kind of echoing what some of the other judges have said. It would be nice if you expanded this a little more. It's a nice moment, and I feel like we go back to the earlier movement maybe a little too quickly, but the chords are really nice, and I think it's something you might want to think about expanding. And then one last comment. I really liked, and this is just a comment on text painting, in measure 34 it happens, and in measure 54 it happens. America never was America. I like that unexpected harmonic change. It's a really good use of kind of modal shifting because it's kind of communicating the idea that America isn't what we expect and the chord isn't what we expect to. I just want to commend you on that. That was a really nice little touch there. I liked it every time
Thank
it
you.
happened. Sure.
Hey, judges. Mr. Godfrey, did you have anything you wanted to say in response, or
Um,
you don't have
no, it's all a work in progress. I taking notes of certain things. But no, I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, and you will get your written comments at the end as well. We appreciate your submissions. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Gerald Gray is a composer, conductor, musician. He holds a BM from Southern University and A&M College. Currently, he is an MM student in choral conducting. Gerald, please introduce your selection.
Good morning. Again, my name is Jaret Gray. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. My name is Jaret Gray. My piece is the Serenity Prayer. I, as researching to write this piece, it was interesting to find out that the composer or the writer of this prayer, of this poem, in fact helped Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with his doctorate degree as I began to search out settings to, and particularly poems to set to music. And so that surely was confirmation that I needed to set this prayer. Secondly, I wrote this prayer, or rather set this prayer to music after my grandmother passed away, as well as my mother, back to back. And certainly in the process of beginning to write that, this epidemic broke out. And so this prayer is written from the place of where I believe the text originates from, the music, the modes that I chose, the introduction, the sonorities, even the melodic line that the soloist sings. They all are intended to take not only the performer, but the listener as well through the general prayer life of someone who is looking and striving for peace, for serenity, to accept things that they can and cannot change. So without further ado, here is the Serenity Prayer set by yours truly.
humility to accept the things I cannot change. I need serenity, courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace. Taking as you did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely with you forever in the next. Amen.
Thank you very much for the composition. We'll now have judges' feedback. Let's start with Dr. Brown. You need to unmute. Dr. Brown, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, Jarrell, I enjoyed the piece very much, and I think your choice of the chromatic extended harmonies worked very well in this piece, because it does capture that sort of warmth and I believe the kind of prayerful mood. And I liked that use of those kinds of harmonies throughout. But I think the one thing that you should be mindful of is to make sure that you allow, again, your phrases to breathe and you don't run right on into one expression after the other without allowing the audience or the listeners to absorb what is actually being said. Such as in measure 8, after the word change, and then you leap right into the next line, I need serenity. I think that phrase ending with change should have a little more space, similar to what you have in measures 20 and 21. And while your metric organization is generally very good, be careful of the natural syllabification of words. You've got some places, for example, you've got courage with the stress being on the end of the word, which is courage, and hardship, and have it. That is not really the sort of natural areas of stress for those words. So be careful that you find something that does not take away from text meaning, because the rhythmic placement or the metric placement of words becomes a little bit clumsy and you've moved them to a different place. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the piece. I think the character of the piece is wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Mrs. Bayaki?
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
You know, I want to first start by saying I think this is such a beautiful and tender piece for Mr. Gray to have written for his mom and his grandmother. And I just, when I listen to the music, not having the beautiful vocal rendition that we just heard, I could just see them smiling down on him. This piece is so touching. It's so tender. I think it's interesting hearing Dr. Brown's comment, because the one word that sticks in my mind where this piece is concerned is prosody, Prosody, and I've written it in the comments, because I think when you accent syllables in music that are not accented in the normal conversation, what it does is sometimes the diction will suffer. Uh, the singer will appear to be a non-native speaker of the language. And so I think that Mr. Gray did such a beautiful job of editing this. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to edit something this well written. But one thing he did when his edit, he made the piece ecumenical, because this piece was written from a Christian perspective. I think that someone of Judaic faith and an Islamic person, just taking out the word Jesus and adding the word you, every listener is going to feel like he is talking to them. So I want to make sure that his conversation is that it's noteworthy. So I just have a suggestion as an exercise to read the lyrics aloud in the rhythm that you've set, and that will clarify all the comments that I made. But overall, I just love this piece, and I hope I'm not overstepping my judge's bound to say I'm so happy that he's a Chicagoan. I hope I get to meet him one day.
Likewise. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Bayaki. Dr. Weston, would you please make your comments?
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Gray, I really enjoyed this piece. You really have a wonderful sense of harmony. And I think that the overall sentiment of prayerfulness comes through in the very subtle kind of rhythmic gestures. I think that there are a few things I wanted to point out that I think might be helpful. Near the end of the piece, measure 39, this is your climax. It's one of the few places where I think your left hand or your low notes aren't really supporting that. It's a moment where if you really want us to hear the fortissimo in its strongest form, that you're going to have to use lower notes in the piano, which you've done earlier, just to get the instrument kind of resonating. So that's something you might want to look into. And this is a really subtle thing. I like your ending. I like the last chord. I think, being kind of nitpicky about notes, B and F sharp are very important in this piece. And I think that you maybe present them a little too much or too early, starting in measure 40 to the end. In fact, I almost wanted to hear maybe that last B and ah extended, the on, on the pitch B extended a little longer, and the F sharp maybe sound through that E major chord that is inverted at the very end. I think that might have been nice to add to, I think, an overall feeling in this piece, which is kind of comfort through adversity. I think that you're not trying to say everything's going to be great. It's almost like throughout all of the strife, and I heard this throughout the piece, there are chords that kind of resolve in a way that we don't expect, that kind of point to a hopefulness. And I think that might have been a nice ending gesture to kind of sum up everything you're trying to do, is to have that F sharp sound while that G sharp, which sounds a little more hopeful, occurs. But beautiful work, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you,
Wonderful
sir.
performance too.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. Dr. Lomax. You're muted, Dr. Lomax.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I echo the sentiments of the other composers. It's a great piece, beautiful harmonies. I did mark a lot of the same things around text. In measure 8, that I need serenity, that's a powerful phrase and line that I would love to have heard come back a couple of times, especially at the end. And I think everything that was said about prosody and how some of your words fall could be fixed by moving that line over just a little bit, maybe a beat and a half or two, to give change some space to land, allow the breath. I need serenity to emphasize that line, allow breath again, and then go on with courage, that Dr. Brown and Dr. Bayaki mentioned. I like your transitions, your harmonies. I did have a question about this B double flat, 26, 27, and measure 27. When I saw that, I'm a drummer, so it doesn't really matter, but I knew it wasn't what I should see on the page. So I would fix that just to make it easier to read. I like the kind of harmonic and some kind of melodic sequence that happens between measures 13 and, 33 and 35. That was really cool. Another place I would add space is after measure 38, because what we heard in the performance, like Dr. Weston said, that does come out as the climax, but the breath to carry through that line wasn't there because it felt rushed to me. So adding some space, allowing the vocalist to breathe there and really sing the line through with the fullness of voice, I think would make that more effective. And then I did also have a question about pitch selection at the end. I have my ideas of what it should be, but I think it works, but it kind of raised my ear a little bit, like it didn't land in a way that just felt subtle, and maybe that was intentional. But overall, I like the piece. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Gray, did you want to respond to anything that you heard, or he sort of the question?
Yes, regarding places where some of the judges have said there should have been extension of breath or of sort, the finale file that made the piano accompaniment could only do so much, and in certain sections, in fact, it was rushed because of the program, but there are certain dynamics and indications in the score to, in fact, retard or modal retard and things of sort like that, that the actual software ignored. And so I do want to point that out, that certainly if this were to be performed live via accompanist as well as soloists, I think that it would be better realized. But certainly my finale program that I have didn't really do justice in the MP3 of the piano. So I did want to add that because I know that the previous judge mentioned measure 38 feeling rushed. And of course, there's a moto retardando there, but my software kind of went through it. So certainly I wanted to add that, but I appreciate all of the judges' feedback, and certainly I'm making use of it, making note now, and I appreciate you all's time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gray, and thank you for that reminder that I didn't say at the beginning of the whole competition, that due to COVID, normally we have live performances with pianists, but we were unable to do that with the hired pianists. So I had to go back to each of the composers and ask them to send a MIDI file. And unfortunately, exactly, things like retards don't always happen. A lot of the subtleties don't happen. So thank you so much for all of you for your comments, and Mr. Gray.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Our next contestant is Maya Johnson. She is a composer and performing violist. After graduating from Interlochen Arts Academy in Michigan, she attended and graduated from Baldwin Wallace Conservatory as a viola performance and composition double major. In 2020, she graduated with her Master's of Music degree from the University of Michigan in composition. Maya, please introduce your selection.
Hello, everybody. This piece is the third song in a song cycle for voice, string quartet, and percussion. The story behind the song cycle came to me when I was studying Schoenberg's The Book of Hanging Gardens. And it's about, that particular piece is about the relationship between the person and the subject of their desire, but through their eyes and all their like perfect glory. And the object of desire for my piece is a sea monster. This particular song in the song cycle is the third song, like I said, and it's at the turning point in this relationship when the creature is testing how far this human will go to be with them, and leading them out into the sea to the point of no return, really. And it's about the bliss and the height of love in a relationship and the inevitable heartbreak in realizing that it cannot go any further. So now please enjoy I Follow the Stars.
Thank you. We welcome judges' feedback, and please let's start with Mrs. Bayaki.
Okay. Maya, I've written some comments here that I hope are helpful to you. One of the things that sticks out in my mind is that I love the mysterious quality about the setting, and I think that it serves the poetry well. Sometimes, though, the poetry kind of gets lost. And so I found myself asking the question, does Maya want me to remember the mood that she's setting? Does she want me to remember the poetry? Does she want me to remember how the poetry and the mood are connected, how they're married to each other? And so I hope that those three questions are helpful to you. I think that the one thing that strikes me is even though the singer that you chosen didn't have any problems with the notes, because I lost so much poetry in certain registers, I just would like to hear you revisit that. I know for me personally, when I'm doing an exercise, sometimes I'll stay on the staff with the notes so that the I give the performer a chance to articulate the message of the poetry, and I give the listener, the person who doesn't have the score in front of him or her, a chance to hear it. And then I can blossom off, because just because the word heavenly is in the score doesn't mean that the range has to be in the heavens. Sometimes you want to hear the heavenly thing, the heavenly word painted in the score so that people hear the words. So I think my comments all center around balance, but I love the mysterious quality about the piece. And the one thing that really sticks out in my mind that, and I don't like to edit people's music, I'd rather ask the question, do you think that the introduction and the interludes have to be as long as they are? Because you're taking people away from the mystery of the music and the beauty of the music. So I hope those comments are helpful.
Thank you, Mrs. Bayaki. Dr. Weston.
Hello, Ms. Johnson. There's a lot about this I really like, and it was good to hear your discussion about your influences, especially Book of the Hanging Gardens. So, after hearing that, I was putting this through the context, which isn't what you were doing, but through kind of early atonal music and what kind of helped identify that as a style, which wasn't just using the full chromatic, but also using a lot of ostinati, which you use. And I was also thinking a little about Weber, and I don't know if he played anything into it because there is that pointillistic. So I think my comments are in line with that. And something to keep in mind, because what's very difficult to do, and this is what they were doing, is how do you have something that repeats but still feels like the music is moving forward and isn't stuck? And that requires really understanding like how your notes relate to each other. And I think in some cases it works well. In some cases I think that like for instance right before the trill figure, before the voice starts in measure 15, that's great. But the fact that it continues, I think the music starts to get stuck, although the voice is moving forward. So those are things you might want to think about. Maybe more variety. Um, don't forget about the left hand or the lower portion of the piano. That's something that came to mind, especially like in measure 32. I like to tell students that if you were to look at a blank wall, a white wall, it looks empty. But if you have a blank wall with one dot, it looks emptier because you have that one little dot to compare it to the vast space. So in places where I think you're trying to create this issue of space, you actually need to have something else to remind us why this is maybe the stars, right? And I like that idea, the fact that you're kind of trying to represent the pointillistic idea of the stars. But don't forget that you need something to reference that gesture by for it to work better. And something else that came to mind, um, I really like this version. I know there was another version for chamber instruments, and I know I've struggled with this kind of moving something from, chamber instruments to piano. You might want to really think about, what is the piano's response? I look at orchestration this way. Orchestration is kind of like writing text for a character in a play, and each character will say or express an idea in a different way. You might want to think a little more about, well, how would the piano kind of speak your music or this music a little more? Because I think in some cases you try to kind of just move one to the other, and just thinking about it being more pianistically. And then the final thing, because I don't want to take up too much time, is I feel a little bit that your end, the piece stops and doesn't really end, if you know what I mean. Meaning, I don't know, I feel like the soprano sings at low B and it stops, but it doesn't feel like we were set up for the music to end, meaning I don't know if there's as much closure, as the earlier judge Bayaki mentioned, there's a lot of space where it's just the piano. And then at the end, I don't know if we need the piano to continue, but something so that we feel a little more closure. Or maybe the voice extends and maybe the voice sings by themselves with maybe sustained notes. But just think about the fact that currently it feels like the music stops rather than ending. But great job and great singing, because that was challenging. And another thing to keep in mind, and I've done this before, singers really like to have support. So if there's more in the bottom register of the piano so they feel like they're not on a tightrope, it helps them and their confidence. So those are things to think about. But good job.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weston. Dr. Lomax?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Solid. So, hi, Ms. Johnson. I have two different thoughts about the piece because we've heard it now two different ways. And the first thing about the music in general, I agree with what's been said earlier. As I was listening to this version, it struck me still that this is a piece that I would love to hear live because of how you're kind of navigating the textures. I think MIDI can be tricky, and I'll speak to that in a second. But I was wondering what I'm supposed to feel as I'm listening, and even as I'm looking at the text. It seemed like the text was urging me one way, but the musical accompaniment was urging me in a different way, and they didn't always align for me. I also had comments or thoughts about motion and momentum. When you said sea monster, I'm like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Maybe they're in the middle of the ocean and that's why it's not really moving, and maybe the relationship is stagnant, but I don't know if that's what you wanted me to hear or feel from the piece. Contrast as well, and foundation. You have cello in the left hand of the piano that I don't feel were utilized. And maybe it's because of where it is in the cycle. Maybe there are other things. And so there are contrasts between pieces that we haven't heard. But I would like to have kind of had it a little fuller in some places in general. But the thing about MIDI, I wanted to say to all the composers, but especially in a piece like this with the chamber component, there's the piece as it is on the page to be read. And then as we move into more maybe virtual kind of circumstances, there's the piece that's written to be rendered, to be performed by the computer, right? And so if you know your MIDI map, then your MIDI score will look completely different than your score to be performed, and that's okay, right? Because then it allows your piece to be heard in the best possible light, rather than depending on the computer and letting it do what it does just because, right? Sometimes we have to compose for the computer and for the performer. And so that's some advice that I would give everyone. I've literally done 3 albums where I wrote specifically for the computer and it fooled everybody that heard it. And when you look at that score, it's not readable. you would never put that in front of people, but it allows the music to be rendered in a way that works as a performance when you need that. So otherwise, I like the ideas, and I can't wait to hear it live. Congratulations on a difficult piece that I think live would be amazing.
Thank you, Dr. Lomax. Dr. Brown?
Most of what I would want to say, I do enjoy the fact that, you know, this is very creatively conceived, and I thought we would hear this instrumental version. I did have some comments about that. With the piano accompaniment, it actually works better than with the instruments, because with that instrumental accompaniment, it actually exacerbates some concerns that have been expressed regarding the vocal line and the text getting lost in the texture of the piece as a whole. And I think in some places what you do musically do not necessarily help to illuminate your text. I'm generally not a big fan of composers choosing their own text material. It's not that that does not work really fairly well for you. It's just that I think you kind of undermine the text in some places, because the piece gets a little busy when too many events are going on. And I can recall vividly in one of my sessions with Hale Smith, I hope you know that composer's name. He said that all instruments do not have to do something at all times, and that we need to consider where we allow them to take a breath, and also where we have the opportunity to thin out textural things so that the piece does not seem too cluttered too often, to the point that everything tends to balance out to a texture that loses things. I hope that you will also speak to, there's a line in your text, I dip my hand into your home. I'm not sure, so when you speak to us, I hope you can tell me what that is supposed to mean. Some areas of the text are, it loses me a bit, to be quite candid. I think that your use of an aggregate based around the C major scale is fine, except that we don't want to, I didn't know you were trying to do some kind of anagrammatic relationship there, but we don't want to get C sick. And with your introduction being as long as it is, and sort of pivoting around the use of really a basic diatonic scale, it's a little lengthy and can become, if you're not careful, somewhat uninteresting to your audience. That range factor is also another one that you have to be careful with. It takes a good singer to do this, because there are some extremes. You go from a B3 to an A5, and that's a pretty wide range, and kudos to the singer for managing it so successfully. But that will limit the number of performances you can get, because you're not going to find, especially among young singers, those who can handle that that kind of range variable. Overall, though, I really appreciate the creative effort that you did in using the kind of pointillistic relationship. Be careful that, I think, as I said before, you don't overuse the elements to the point that you really sabotage your own text. But thank you so much for that contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Ms. Johnson, giving you an opportunity for any responses to any of the questions you heard or any clarifications.
Yes. So about that line, I dip my hand into your home. I thought of that line as when you are trying to adapt to the lifestyle of a lover, a very demanding lover, and trying to immerse yourself in their lifestyle and their design, and that's kind of what this whole piece is about, is learning to acclimate yourself to someone else to the point of your own like detriment, to your own sacrifice. And I think as Black women especially, for me in my life, I find that I often have to twist and contort myself and to fit into to make other people comfortable. And I definitely, and because I did write the text, you know, I can change whatever I want, and that's something I most likely will do as I continue to revise this piece. So Thank you so much for your comments. And thank you also to Lucia and who I took a class with and I'm good friends with, and Dr. Toppin as well, for this piece.
Thank you so much, Maya. We appreciate it. Our next contestant is Jaret Roseboro. He's a pianist and a director of choral activities at the Pine Forge Academy. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in music education, vocal choral music from Oakwood University. He's currently a master's degree student in choral conducting at Georgia State University. Jarrett, please introduce your selection.
Thank you so much. Hello to everyone. This piece is entitled A Song of Life. I was inspired to write it while listening to another opera, a one-act radio opera by Menotti, that of The Old Maid and the Thief. And just a brief idea, there is a particular scene where the thief is living with Miss Todd, who's the maid, and then her younger apprentice, Letitia, has developed feelings for this thief. And in her aria, Still Me, Sweet Thief, she is appealing to this thief to take her away from the life as she knows it, which is one that's rather uneventful. And as I was sitting there, it just occurred to me that she was depending on something external or depending on life to offer her some type of opportunity to change life as she knew it. And so that inspired me in that I don't ever want to get in a place where I am waiting on life to offer me an opportunity for change, for growth, for development. And so this song, as you will hear it, speaks to the idea of taking every moment in life as I have learned it and living it to its fullest. And now, please enjoy, and this is also original text, please enjoy A Song of Life.
Some filled with love so full song is a song, a song of life.
Thank you. Now we will have feedback from the judges, and let's start with Dr. Weston, please.
Well, now, good afternoon, Mr. Roseborough. I really enjoyed this piece, really imaginative. I always feel, and I probably should have said this, Ms. Johnson, that writing the text and the music is, I think, a commendable and more difficult project than one might think, because you can always change everything, and when you have so many choices, that makes making a decision more difficult. One of the things I wanted to talk about, I really like the opening. I like the counterpoint. I was just hoping that maybe there was some more of that later in the piece. As I said to another composer, any kind of motive or gesture that you present in a piece is like a character in a story, and we almost kind of hope to see that again. In the same way that your ending chord progression kind of harkens back to what happened in the opening section. But that's such a striking moment, that opening. It would be nice to see you develop that somehow in the middle of the piece. But I really enjoyed that, so I guess that's why I really wanted to hear it again. You might want to think about section, like from measures 42 to 47. I have huge hands. Not a great pianist, but I have big hands, and there's a lot that's going on there. It's kind of difficult for some pianists to reach over a ninth without having to roll it, and you don't indicate that some of those left-hand chords are rolled. So there's the computer can do it, obviously, but you might want to think about the logistics of that and maybe ways of making sure that the pianist can actually, I'm not sure if you're a pianist or you're okay with that, but that's something to think about. I see you have pedal markings, but that was just something that came to mind. I really like the development of the piece. I think there's great harmony. Notational issues. If you do not have to use C flat, I wouldn't. So like going from measure 25, well really 26, you have a C flat going to a E natural. Just use B natural. It's just easier, I'm sure, for the singer, because an augmented third isn't as easy to sing as maybe a perfect fourth. But really nice. I think it's a really nice piece, and bravo.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. Dr. Lomax?
Yes, can you hear me? Good afternoon. I like this piece too. I like the use of harmony. It's different from the other composers, but still nice in terms of use of color palette. I did, though, have a question about the end. It just ends, but it doesn't end. I think Dr. Weston said earlier, it ends, but it doesn't end, or it stops, but it doesn't end, or something to that effect. Like it feels like it needs something else to bring some closure. I was drawn into the piece by the intro, but I don't hear or feel how it's connected to the rest of the piece. So it's almost like it's a separate thing that stands on its own, and then we have the piece. So maybe connecting the two or bringing it back makes the connection. I like the measure 45 as an example, how free lands on that chord there. That's an example of use of harmony that I really appreciate throughout the piece. The text, though, loses me in a couple places. One, just reading the text, I feel like there's punctuation that could help with meaning just for me as a reader. But then it moves like from day in terms of how the text is focused, day to song to they. I don't know who they is. And is the song in the day or is it the day? Like those connections aren't made well for me, just in the text itself. And then the last thing I'll say is kind of musical inflection. You use in measure 15 the word life, and it's a song of life, but it lands on a descending pitch, you know, from where it's coming from. And then scorn is up a fifth, and the same as life after that, and that's really, really high. So, you know, I'm not singing that, and I'm glad. But I just wonder if you're trying to say scorn and life are one and the same, and not really drawing a distinction from, you know, the pain of life to the joy of life kind of thing. So the way you're painting that, I'm not sure what you want me to know or take away. But otherwise, I think the piece in general is good, and I enjoyed listening to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lomax. Dr. Brown? You need to unmute.
Can the host unmute me because I didn't mute myself? Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. As I was saying, I really did enjoy this piece, and I totally agree with my colleagues. I said of it, that's a very interesting accompaniment, and then when it falls to these rather tranquil and sustained chords, it caused me to say, now, what was that all about? It's a little disjunct, the introduction, as nice as the introduction is, from the character of the piece when you go into these lush and more sustained harmonies that follow. I think you make a much better use of the flourishes of 16th note passages interspersed between your text, like what you have beginning in measure 18. I think that's a very nice contrast to those vertical harmonic pillars in the piece, which is really very nicely conceived. And while I do agree that in terms of your text painting some things, you would think the line would go perhaps in a different direction, you are an extremely capable composer of beautiful lyric melody, and I appreciate that very much, because any singer likes to have a beautiful line to sing, and that is something that is extremely important, and you do a fine job of that. I do admonish you, however, unless you only intend for this to be sung by a lyric or lyric coloratura soprano, be careful of range again, because this has some real business going on in the extremes of the upper register at a couple of places, which you have to be mindful of. I think there's an excellent balance of the placement of the syllables and words at places where metrically they would fall to bring attention to text. It's just that sometimes the lines don't seem to either ascend or descend, as I believe one of my colleagues, perhaps Dr. Lomax, indicated in terms of what you have with regard to text and what happens directionally with the melody line. But overall, I really, I love the choice of harmonies. I do enjoy and appreciate compositionally your being able to spin beautiful melodies. And thank you for this.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mrs. Bayaki?
Yes, can everyone hear me? I think that I would serve this panel well if I just read a brief excerpt from my comments. I said, I love the harmonic palette and how he moves seamlessly from key to key. I would follow this song to the end of time in every key imaginable. And I used an exclamation point, which I don't like to do because it's like salt. You don't really need it if you've got good food, but I felt an exclamation point was needed there. I really like this piece a lot. The thing that is so startling to me is the word that always comes back to my ear is tessitura, because you've got this beautiful introduction, and when a singer comes in right away, the line that is written looks like an instrumental line versus a vocal line, because I lost that beautiful word, that beautiful phrase. It has to be set up. The day now grown old. Your poetry is so beautiful and so strong that it can stand on its own. Just needs a few little tweaks here and there, a few clarifications, and the music same thing. You've got two wonderful pieces that you've wedded quite well, but at the same time, there's it's the notes sometimes, just some of the leaps, some of the ranges of the notes within a phrase. That phrase is so powerful, it doesn't need any competition. I think we can hear what the singer can do at a later time. I don't think you need to show off the vocal range here. I think you really need some clarification of those words, and just keep that word tessitura in mind as you're writing. Not an easy thing to do, especially in measure 11, measure 55, those types of things. But other than that, like I said, I'll follow this song to the end of the earth. I think it's beautiful, and I think you have a wonderful piece.
Thank you, Mrs. Bayaki. Mr. Roseborough, did you want to make any comments in response, or anything you want to say? You have to unmute.
Yes, just first and foremost, thank you so much to the judges for the feedback. Much taken in, and just being able to get different eyes and different ears to look and give feedback is always so greatly appreciated, and will definitely be taken into consideration. There was just two things that I had wanted to mention that I forgot to mention in the introduction. If you've ever heard the aria "Still Me Sweet Thief," there's a particular melodic component when she begins singing those particular lyrics, the da-dum, ba-dum, right? That theme, along with the da-dum, ba-dum, is juxtaposed and put in all throughout the particular piece, so that you hear that idea presented. And then the other thing that I just wanted to comment on the piece, that yes, there are moments, and I want to go back now and be even more intentional, but there are moments where the melodic content does take different leaps, and it takes different bounds, if you will, just to really reflect the idea that as life has its beauty, it also has its unexpected moments where you would expect life to go one way, and it just completely throws you in a different idea or in a different context. So thank you all so much for your eyes and your ears and your minds with your critiques of this piece.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And now we'll have our last contestant, Delshawn Taylor, who is an award-winning baritone composer, pianist, and conductor. Hailing from Indiana University, he is an MBA candidate and received early acceptance into the University of Pennsylvania's executive program in partnership with the National Art Strategies. Delshawn, please introduce your selection.
Good afternoon, everyone. As a young child, I was always spellbound by the fairy tales my parents would read to me. And when I came across Jonathan October's Southern Gothic retelling of the classic Rumpelstiltskin story with a splash of Blackness, I was eager to not only read it, but set it to music. So, honoring the writer's idea of a folk song, I composed a simple yet haunting melody that would be easily passed down through generations like any folk song. The accompaniment is not only supportive, but rhythmically diverse. At times, it depicts both the entrapment of the littman and the sweet musicality of the littman's fiddle. The vocal line and the accompaniment evolve throughout the composition in melancholy beauty in the retelling of this classic fable, but also in the retelling of the historical undercurrent of the composition and text, which is the lynching of African Americans in American history. The text says, "Run away, black boy, run, run away. The tree is calling your name." And now please enjoy The Legend of the Littman.
Oh, once there was a black boy, a child the age of 10. He lived with his black papa in the town of Timberton. They scarcely had money, their farm would barely grow. The roads were bare and dry, for 3 old witches made it so. Run away, black boy, run, run away. The tree is calling your name. One day he found a fiddle, its wood was sweet and old. For once he played his songs, he could turn all dust to gold. He filled their house with treasures, with wine and food and sweets. But their fine things had filled the witches' hearts with jealousy. Run away, black boy, run, run away. The tree is calling your name. Upon an old plantation, the 3 witches did dwell. They cooked a black, black cat and called their master from hell. Oh, Rosa, 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 your wicked majesty, we want to kill the black boy. Oh, so mote it be. Run away, black boy, run, run away. The tree is calling your name. As day clean turned to daylight, the witches sang a song. The notes were filled with evil, and they sang the whole night long. The black boy heard the music, its bitter chords did bite, and underneath the trance he left his papa in the night. Run, child, run, run away, black boy, run, run away. The tree is calling your name. The witches took the black boy, they fed him tea and pie, and once he had his fill, they said, my tree boy want to die. They chopped his little fingers, soaked him in turpentine. They hung him from a sycamore. The black boy burned and died. And so this ends our story of the boy from Timberton. That boy is no devil, you must never forget him. And as that boy gained power, his spirit filled the land. The devil took a second name, Beware, beware, oh black boy, beware our terror knows.
Thank you. May we get some judges' feedback, beginning with Dr. Lomax, please?
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. I like the narrative aspect of this song and appreciate the variations rhythmically and other such word painting. Although toward the end, I had a question as to, in measure 66, whether that actually captured the text, the accompaniment there captured the text. So I wrote, is it dark enough? Is it kind of ominous enough? It's thinned out, which could mean mystery, but it just, I don't know, it didn't grab me there with the effectiveness of the texture in other places. Also, I really like the ending. Sometimes in a piece like this, the ending could be the hardest part, but that accelerando with the rhythm the way it is and how it moves and sustaining the voice throughout, I thought was really effective. Last thing, calling your name. That comes around several times, and I wonder if that would be a place to vary the rhythm, given what the text is about. Calling your name or something like that to kind of push it forward in some places, I think would help too. So, but I enjoyed the piece. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Lomax. Dr. Brown?
Well, I really thoroughly enjoyed this piece, and I think it really reflects a great resourceful youth in terms of the economy of ideas, because though this piece is basically a sectionally repetitive piece, sort of a modified strophic form, it has the potential of course, becoming very boring. But with each iteration of this little melody that you have here, you have something that's so interesting to me and compelling in terms of your use of various motives in the piano. And at times it's really quite brilliant. I do think the flowing 16th note triplets that you use in measure 35 would have been better used had you used them earlier in your passage Runaway Black Boy. I love the sense of movement and running that's created in that passage, and I thought it perhaps should have been reserved for that section and would have come off more effectively. I love the interchange between the various forms of the minor scale that you use here and the generally excellent use of the piano as a diverting, as I said, a textural element against this kind of a repetitive melody. I do want to ask a question. I could not tell whether or not this was a prepared electronic piano or what, but certainly this would come off better if the piano were in some respects more in the foreground. It seemed to have been an understatement given the fact that it plays such a vital role in this, as I said, rather repetitive piece in terms of the vocal melody. Overall, I like the piece. I like the brilliant ending. I totally agree with my colleague, Dr. Lomax, on that. The range tends to be accessible, except of course for the high notes, but that is something that is not in terms of the tessitura so extreme that it would discourage even a younger singer. Generally speaking, though, I like this piece very much and the way you've said it. I thought it was quite nicely done, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mrs. Vaaki, please.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to begin, Mr. Taylor, by saying I really love the dance-like quality of this piece. One of the things that struck me, I'm very much a lover of nursery rhymes, and I think the story that you've chosen sort of lines up with that. So you've got this story that kind of ends, rather tragically, which many nursery rhymes do. but I think your music just lifted this whole theme of tragic endings to a point where the quality is so lilting and so dance-like. It's one of those things that people will walk away humming, walk away singing, and I think really enjoy it. I think your idea of seeing this as a piece that becomes part of the nursery rhyme canon is certainly a possibility. Uh, I just have a few little things that I've noted in a section that I call score prep and mechanics. But overall, I enjoyed the piece tremendously, and I thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Baaki. Dr. Weston?
Hello, Mr. Taylor. I want to echo what my colleagues have said. It is difficult to write a good melody, and that cannot be understated. And like Ms. Biaki said, it's a melody that, after hearing it, it's still running in my head. And so bravo to you for that. I've thought about the first time I heard it, and then this subsequent time, two traditions came to mind, or one tradition and one individual. Theme and variations, which I'm sure you're aware of, and also Schubert and his lieder, because he wrote things which were strophic. I think you should keep in mind what happens in those two situations. In theme and variation, you obviously have the same theme or melody, and the composer with each iteration not only uses different rhythmic or textural changes, but also some harmonic choices that are a little unexpected. I think something you might want to think about as far as variety is concerned is maybe sometimes using a chord that you haven't used before at a specific time in the same melody. Another thing that happens sometimes in theme and variation is the sectionality of the piece gets blurred, so music that ends one section continues into the next. I thought of that specifically near the end of the piece, and I think it's measure 74 going to 77. Those repeated G's are really nice. I thought maybe you could use that for just a little more so that the blending of one section to the next would be something new. In fact, I think it's the piece Der Wegweiser by Schubert, where he ends the piece after using basically variations of the same progression with kind of a pedal G, just to provide some sort of variety. And also, I think it goes with the sparseness of what you're discussing. I agree, the ending is great, great kind of energy to the end. There's one mechanical kind of nitpicky thing just to think about, and maybe just thinking about, well, I teach music theory, but in measure 26, you have a lot of leading tones in that measure, a lot of F sharps. And because it's in the bass, and it's also in the right hand, and the melody sings it, I think you just keep in mind that something Schubert does is he doesn't overuse a leading tone, because it is a powerful note within the key, and you want to make sure that the melody is always, special. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. But overall, I really liked it. I thought you did a great job. And again, there's one last thing I want to mention. You have different sections. It might be nice to have some sort of indication to the performer, like lento or fiery or somber, something. There are tempo changes. I'm thinking about like measure 49, that changes, just some indication to the performer as the effect that you want. I think that will kind of aid in future live performances when we're back to that. But great job.
Thank you again. Mr. Taylor, did you have anything you would like to say in response to
Just thank you to all the judges for their feedback. I think Dr. Brown had a question about the piano. It is a MIDI, it's a MP3 of like a MIDI, of a MIDI. So that probably why it's kind of hard to hear, but in a live setting, it would have a lot more presence and support for the singer. but it's been a really great afternoon hearing the other pieces and learning from you all. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. My sincerest thanks to the 5 composers who entered the competition intended to foster the talents of young African American composers. And my sincerest thanks also to the judges. This is our largest pool of invited composers, and we look forward to the continued growth of this division. The compositions of all the composers today will be entered into our research tool, the African Diaspora Music Project database, which is a free website to assist people interested in learning more about music of the diaspora. They will also receive a featured spotlight on our George Shirley competition website for future vocal competitors to consider. We will now show a few minutes of the 2017 Composers Competition as the scores are tabulated. So we'll see you back in a few minutes. Thank you.
And the piece that you will hear today is part of an unfinished work that I'm currently working on. It's a song cycle for soprano titled Moments in Sonder. And sonder is the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. So the goal behind this work was to kind of capture these fleeting short moments. So all of the songs in the song cycle are using short poems written by Maya Angelou. And so the first of the set is Sounds Like Pearl. So without further ado, I'll let you hear it. And here we go.
composition of mine is Dream Song. This is what will be the fourth movement of a song cycle titled Dunbar's Dreams. And I've chosen 4 poems that all have reference to dreams. He actually has 2 poems that are both titled Dream Song. This one is Dream Song 1, which will be the last one. Dream Song 2 will be the second in the cycle. And I've recently just fallen in love with the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar. There's so much imagery that he chooses to use. He's very intentional with the words, and specifically with this poem. What came to me were the words climb, which is an archaic word that references climate or weather. There's the use of the word naught, I love the word sublime, and I'm just a lover of love. I absolutely love love. Whether I'm in it or not, doesn't matter, I just love love. And the two stanzas of this poem all end with talking about the lady of my dreams. And so everything that's set up in the lines that precede that all talk about passion. And so what I try to achieve with this song is just a flowing passion that just keeps going and going and going until he finally talks about the lady of my dreams. So this is Dream Song. Competitor X, and the piece you will hear today is Dream Variations, set to the poetry of another poet who talks a lot about dreams, Langston Hughes, who actually happens to be my favorite poet. And this piece was specifically written for Dorian Dillard, the singer who will sing it today. And the reason I really love this poem is that it really speaks to the sense of sort of blind optimism that African Americans have to deal with as members of society, that we, there's times where we have to absolutely picture ourselves in a better place than where we really are in order to actually get there. We have to see ourselves there, and I think that's what Langston Hughes really captures in this poem, is that sense of wonder that we have for ourselves, even though we may not always be in that place that we envision ourselves as members of a society that hasn't always catered to us. So, Dream Variations.
To flee, my arms wide.
Marquita Lister has earned worldwide critical praise over the past 2 decades for her singing. Her impressive repertoire shows her courage and determination to dare the utmost in performance. She has appeared with major opera companies worldwide alongside some of the most renowned artists, such as Placido Domingo, Frederica von Stade, Simon Estes, and Cheryl Mills. She has, in addition, shown a commitment to the performance of the Negro spiritual and to the promotion of works by African-American composers. As an educator at Morgan State University, she nurtures the talents of African-American students who desire to follow in her footsteps as professional singers. It was because of her commitment to the next generation of singers and composers that she established the Makita Lister Prize for Composition as a part of the George Shirley Vocal Competition. We are delighted to have her present the $1,000 prize to our first prize winner. Please join me in welcoming Makita Lister.
Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be here, and it's certainly an honor to be part of such a wonderful process. Thank you, contestants, for sharing your gifts with us today, and judges for your words of wisdom, and certainly to the singers for their very beautiful performances. As a singer, we're constantly looking for wonderful repertoire and new repertoire and innovative pieces for which our voices can create, our voices can soar, our voices can express. And as a classically oriented singer, you're always led in the direction of Bach, Schumann, Schubert, Verdi, Strauss, to name a few. But we know we have our own wonderful set of composers who I feel are unsung heroes, that I feel we should do more of the works of. And we have a new generation of fabulous composers, as we heard today, and as we heard from the previous competitions. Just a minute, I'm trying to see if we have all of the scoring here. So, is it okay, Louise, to announce the winner?
Yes, please.
Okay, so without further ado, for your wonderful composition of the Serenity Prayer, I am pleased to give the $1,000 award to Gerald Gray. Congratulations, Gerald.
This year, thank you, Ms. Lister.
You're quite welcome.
This year, in addition to a first prize, we were able to award a second and a third prize. Second prize of $500 from a fundraiser by Michigan Opera Theater last fall goes to, I'm sorry, give me a second, Ethan Godfrey for his composition. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The third prize of $250 given in memory of supporter Alma Mayson will go to Jaret Roseborough.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you again to
So
all
much.
of the contestants for your wonderful submissions. Our final remarks will be delivered by George Shirley. He has won international acclaim for his performances with the Metropolitan Opera, where he was the first African-American tenor to sing leading roles, and with major opera, symphony orchestras, opera houses, and festivals worldwide. Mr. Shirley received a Grammy Award for his role Ferrando in the RCA recording of Mozart's opera Così fan tutte. He has performed more than 80 operatic roles, as well as oratorio and recital literature over the span of his 60-year career. A graduate of Detroit Northern High School and Wayne State University, he was the first African-American assigned to a high school teaching position in vocal music in Detroit, and the first African American member of the United States Army Chorus in Washington, D.C. In September of 2015, he received the National Medal of Arts from President Barack Obama at the White House. He is married to the visual artist Gladys Shirley and is a proud father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. As a brilliant educator, musician, and advocate, this competition is proud to bear the name of an artist whose name is synonymous with the highest level of excellence. We invite Mr. Shirley to speak a few words to the composers and to you, our audience, who took the time to watch this competition. Mr. Shirley?
Well, again, this is for me a highlight of my life experience as a performer, as a teacher, one that I dreamed of and was concretized by Professor Louise Toppin, without whom this would not be a possibility. So I must thank her for her dedication to this enterprise. And I want to thank everyone who is involved in creating this outcome, this moment of a dream, this outcome of a dream. The staff, the crew that actually, I think all of them are part of Louise's family, who make this come to pass. To you who have served today as judges for this competition, my deep gratitude. And to the contestants, these incredibly gifted young musicians, thinkers, intellects who create the music, who will continue to create the music, create the poetry, the music, and to continue to give Black America a voice in song, the most powerful, the first means of communication. Arguably, hearing the baby gurgle and wail and moan, they're trying to say something. And this is an extension of that primitive, primal desire to speak. And you can see from the young composers that we have heard from today that this will continue and continue to touch the souls of humankind. To be able to say to everyone who sings, no matter their ethnicity, politics, religion, sexuality, gender, this belongs to you as well. And as long as you embrace it with respect, respect for its message, respect for those who created it, you have a right to sing it. So thank all of you for being a part of this. I trust that you will continue to be a part of it. And I look forward to next year when hopefully we can get together face to face, cheek to jowl, and make this happen again. For that, we need to be vigilant. We need to obey the rules. We need to call upon the spirit that has created every one of us to take us down the path that we should, that we must go in order to make this happen again, live. Thanks again. It's been a wonderful experience for me. I trust it has been for you. And I look forward to continuing this so that next year it will happen in the hall without worrying about the other than the sound of music coming from the mouth. Thank you so much. God bless everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Shirley. And I want to reiterate to the composers that we hope you will come back if you were not the first prize winner this year. We look forward to seeing your submissions and having you with us again next year. As we conclude, I would like to thank the people who made this Zoom webinar possible, which Mr. Shirley alluded to, but I want to give their names. Many thanks to the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance, that although we weren't in the building, we are using the technology from the university. I'd like to thank George Shirley, Marquita Lister, all the judges and competitors, Natasha Gilliam of Design Energy, Leslie Gilliam, Ryan Stewart of Rye One Inc., Alvin Hill of the University of Michigan, and our Director of Development, Versal Smith of Smith-Jackson Arts. I would also like to thank our donors and all of you who believe in our mission and support the work of this competition. We thank you for watching our competition and look forward to seeing you next year, May 21st to 23rd, 2021, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance for the 10th annual George Shirley Vocal Competition. Until then, be safe, be well.